Our first writer says, my wife's family has a long history of getting together every Sunday for dinner. They seem to get along with each other, at least superficially, but I don't quite seem to fit into the family culture. I just don't feel comfortable there. Actually, most of all, I just don't like most social events. I just don't want to go. But she's beginning to raise the volume as she insists that I go to these family dinners. What do I do? Every partner has a right to say to their partner that they don't like a kind of behavior. I get to tell my partner that I don't like it when she turns the television on while I'm on the phone in that room, or if she talks on her cell phone while I'm on the phone. But if we require our partners, so we get to say what we don't like, what somebody does to us, but if we require our partners to change who they are to give us what we want, we're dead. As soon as I tell my partner that she needs to be different, I don't really have a partner anymore. I have a hostage. So what could you say to your wife? You could say something like this. Sweetie, this has nothing to do with your family, and it has nothing to do with supporting you. I just don't especially like being in groups, and you're asking me to change what I like. You're asking me to change who I am. I don't ask you to like the things I do, and I'm just not comfortable being pushed to do what you like. So can you accept me as I am? Something like that. Now, back to me and talking to the audience. This does not mean that you can't ask your partner to do something, anything. But if you repeat a request and you get insistent about it, it's not a request anymore. So it's okay for this guy's wife to ask him if he'd like to go to the family dinner, maybe even ask him again, maybe ask him once a year. I don't know. But repeated requests become demands, and you're really going to hate the results if you do that to your partner. So this is about changing your partner to do something for you. This would not apply to your partner injuring you. We alluded to that a little bit ago. For example, what if your partner is filthy, never takes a bath, makes messes, leaves garbage around the house, is a hoarder, and he claims that this is just who he is? Nope, don't get to do that, because his filthiness affects you negatively. It's an injury, either an injury to health, to sanitation, to your ears, to whatever. He doesn't get to do that. Whereas you can't, now this would be sneaky, but some people would claim, well, it hurts my feelings that you don't want to be with my family. No, not really. Having a clean house is really kind of a necessity to many people. Requiring your partner to go to your family outings because it hurts your feelings? No, because we could claim it hurts our feelings to not get anything at all. So there's quite a difference between the two. Here's somebody who says, my 17-year-old son is often rude and uncooperative. I don't understand it. I give him everything he wants, and the kid's never grateful. If I ask for the least bit of effort from him, he scowls and shrugs his shoulders and says something rude. Why is he not grateful instead? So keep in mind that I don't know your son directly, but I can tell you the almost unvarying answer to your question, actually answers to your question. After knowing hundreds, maybe thousands of kids like this, kids tend to behave in response, an involuntary reflex really, to pain, like adults do. He doesn't feel loved, which is painful, and his response is to be rude. Now, there are a lot of different responses. His just happens to be rude, which is a form of anger and retaliation. Retaliation for what, you must be thinking, because after all, you give him everything, right? How could he possibly be punishing you for giving him everything? Well, that's the problem, is that he's been trained by you to feel entitled to whatever he wants. you yourself said you give him everything. When he doesn't get what he wants, he's learned, again, from you, how to get what he wants. He's learned that if he ever fails to get things exactly like he wants, then he throws a little fit, or he gets rude, or he cries, because he's learned that with a little drama, he'll get whatever he wants. Again, my guess is that he started learning this when he was probably less than a year old. He's learned to be a master manipulator, and solely because it works. Kids only do what they do because it works. We train them to do what they do because we reward what they do. Now, we might protest and whine about it, but in the end, we give in to them. I've watched uncounted kids in the checkout line at stores, and the kid whines louder and louder, and the mom or the dad says, no, you can't have that. And the kid just keeps going until they reach that magical volume and tone where the parent gives in. So the parent just taught the kid, here's how loud and here's the tone you have to use for me to give in and finally with exasperation give you what you want. And see, the parents think that just because they go, well, okay then, they're actually retaliating against the kid. So the kid's learning the whole thing: manipulation, victimhood, retaliation, punishment. The kid just learned how to get what he wants, and the parent taught him that. Our kids behave the way they do because of us, with pretty much no exceptions. Solution? I could tell you the solution, but I'm not going to. Because you're whining and I'm not going to train you to whine. No, that's not the real reason. Because the solution is all about learning to love and teach our kids. So read the parenting book. And if you still have a question, let me know. But if you read the parenting book, and if you go to the master index on the website and you look under teaching children to be responsible, responding to children who whine or cry, you're going to find lots of references. A couple had been, I'd been seeing a couple for like a year, and one of them was controlling and the other was eager to please. But the initial bloom fell off the rose of the relationship, and in the beginning they were distracted from seeing how things were because, that initial falling in love. But then that began to fall away. So the controller in the beginning had got what he wanted, and the pleaser didn't mind giving it in the beginning. That all felt good in the beginning. It felt okay. But it's so temporary and it's forced. I can't tell you how common this is. So then the controller, we'll call her Susie, finally erupts with a dissatisfaction about a whole lot of things about her husband, which she had been holding in without realizing it. Now, I talked with them and helped them both see what they'd been doing. The man writes and says this: I see how I can be controlling. I'd like things a certain way. I've used that as a way to feel okay. Common thing to do. And Susie, I had it backwards. He's the controller and she's the one that gives in. And Susie was just too afraid to tell you. So you weren't getting verbal feedback, but she was telling you with her face that she was afraid. But you're not accustomed to looking for that. You would naturally tend to assume that everything is fine because you wanted it to be fine. As long as you're controlling and getting what you want, why would you ever look for negative feedback? That's a very natural thing, not necessarily ugly at all. Very common to see what we want and then claim that there was no feedback otherwise. But yeah, there really was. He continues to write, I heard you say a while back that being single is very different from being in a couple. I don't think I've done the best job at changing to being in a couple. Well, bless your heart. This is an example of truth-telling. It's a huge adjustment to go from being single, where you can make all the decisions you want, to being in a couple where you make joint decisions, and very few people make this adjustment easily. You continue. In most cases, I just haven't thought about it. For example, we had to hire somebody to do remodeling for the house, and it didn't even occur to me to ask for her input in the interviewing. I just did it myself because that's how I've always done it. Nice example. Share that example with your wife, with Susie. Tell her how you ignored her. Now, be aware that she might tend to say, because you've been a controller for so long and she's been a pleaser, she might say, oh, that's okay. Why? Because she, being a people pleaser, likes things to be calm and will tend to put up with things that she doesn't necessarily like to keep things calm. Just like you put up with ignoring her facial expressions. If she says that it's all right, do not let her do that. Again, that's the problem, that you tend to do things your way, and in order to keep the peace, which is her definition of happy, she lets you. Now, in the short run, this seems to work, but in the long run, it's a disaster. We get away with just about anything while we're initially in love, which is why when people are in that initial bloom of falling in love, I pretty much tell them don't make any long-term decisions like getting married, because we don't really see things as they are. The husband says, I've never had to try to include anybody, so I just don't have that experience. I can see some places where I can lighten up, where I can involve Susie more and let things change. Good for you. But you're getting this in your head. You don't feel it yet, the need to share with your partner, that sense of unselfishness. Why not? Because you don't feel loved enough yet. If you did, you would lose your need to control. We control people only because we feel empty and it gives us a sense of power. It's easy to understand this in your head. You continue. One reason that I'm scared right now is seeing how I've been messing up. I'm afraid that you and Susie will love me less. Despite the progress I've made, I still apparently feel like I need to be perfect to be okay. And I don't want to keep doing that. So I'm going to help you right now. It's pretty important that you hear this. So listen slowly. You have been selfish and controlling. I'll listen to that again, because as a controller, you hate hearing words like this, and you control people so that they'll never say them to you. You've been selfish and controlling, and I don't care. Those are natural responses to pain and fear, which you've experienced in abundance for a lifetime. You're still learning. You're still learning as a person. You're still learning how to be a partner. And as long as you're willing to learn, you'll be fine. I love you no less. I'm just observing, loving you, teaching you. Not a problem. So you must put together two seemingly incompatible statements that you've probably never heard put together before. You've been selfish and controlling, and as far as relationships go, stupid, and you're not bad. All of our lives, we've been told that we're stupid or selfish or controlling or whatever, and there's always been a tone. When you were a little kid and your mom came down and said, you're being selfish, there was always a tone. I don't believe I've ever heard a parent outside of real love say to a child, do you see that you're being selfish? With just an instructional tone. That word always has a negative tone. Your inability to put those together, that you're selfish, controlling, and stupid, and not bad, is why you have ignored all evidence of your being controlling. Because as soon as you go to think you're doing something bad, you wipe away any evidence that you might see that you're controlling, because it would make you bad. So you just make yourself not bad. You can't put them together until you get number 2 thoroughly first, which is that you're not bad. So we have to get both. And that's the purpose of having loving and wise people in our lives. You keep going. Another reason is that I really like my life with Susie. And I don't want to mess it up. When the fear gets really bad, I find myself thinking that I'm just so flawed, I'll never be capable of a relationship. I doubt it. Susie actually asked me if I thought you were capable of being more open and less controlling. And I said, I don't know. I don't know yet. Not because I doubt you, but because people act unpredictably when they're finally faced with the requirement that they must stop the old way of living. Some people continue to cling to old behaviors for dear life. Other people pay attention. And it's hard to know how that's going to go ahead of time. You continue. Despite all of that, I feel like I've learned too much and come too far to stop now. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Now, again, listen slowly. Feel my caring for you as I respond to your statement that you're willing to do whatever it takes. We'll see. Meaning, we'll see if you're willing to do whatever it takes. I'm willing to help you. I'm willing to help you a lot. But only you can decide if you really are willing to do whatever it takes. I hear the following almost every day. I really do want to do this, as in I really do want to change. And usually I believe that. But then people say, I'm willing to do what it takes. And only sometimes does that turn out to be true. You continue. I really do want to learn to love Susie better. I want this relationship not just to work, but to be fantastic. And I want your help to do that. If you do one thing, you'll probably make it. If you commit to fully trust somebody that is not you, somebody who knows what they're doing, you'll make it. I don't really care if it's me, but it's got to be somebody. That means that you will believe whatever that somebody tells you without arguing. Now, that sounds like a bold thing to tell somebody, but you've already proven that your way doesn't work. So what have you got to lose? You can ask all the questions you want, but you'll believe whatever you're told, and you'll do whatever you're told to do. Why? So let's say it was me, and you trust me. Because it gives me a kick to control you, much rather watch a good movie. Because you don't know what you're doing yet. You couldn't until you got into this kind of committed relationship. You couldn't possibly know whether you'd be a loving partner. And you need the help. And if you hang on to the past while you get help, you'll be doomed. Because you'll always find a reason not to trust. Almost everybody does, which is why so few people actually ever change, even with real love. Because they get to the place where they have to give something up. Where they have to, genuine trust means you have to give something up. I had a man here once for an intervention who, with tears running down his face after having been through 6 marriages, looked at me and said, "Oh my gosh, I finally get it. I finally understand. It's like being reborn." This guy was 60 plus years old. I understand now how to find happiness. And I thought, just like I said to you, we'll see. He said, "I trust you completely. I'll do whatever you tell me." We'll see. He got home, and within 2 days, he had to change something about his behavior, which was inconsiderate and selfish, to be a real partner. And his progress stopped immediately. He was done. He was willing to do whatever it took to change, except whatever I suggested he do. No matter what I said, that was an exception. Well, I'm willing to do anything except that. And if I named another thing and that, and in other words, you're willing to do nothing different, which is what most people mean when they say I'm willing to do anything. So when I say do whatever you're told, I mean it in the same way that I told my climbing instructor or caving instructor or whitewater rafting instructor, I'll do whatever you tell me. And I really did, because they knew more than I did. And the possible results of my not doing what they told me were potentially risking my life. Trust applies everywhere. Or in the same way that I would tell new surgeons when I was a surgical instructor, do it my way, do exactly what I tell you, and if you want to improvise later, you can. And the people who listened did well. The people who don't or who didn't did poorly. Same's true with all of us. We have to learn to trust, indispensable in growing. Here's a Sylvie story. Jeanette is writing this, her mother, mainly because Sylvie doesn't send me emails yet. She's 4, sends me. She draws things mostly to her grandmother with crayon, and we get little pictures of them, but I don't get emails. Jeanette writes, and she says, Grandma, Donna, says to the kids, I love you. And at first they responded with, I love you too. But then Donna taught them to say instead, you, I mean, this is the kid speaking, you, meaning Grandma, you love me, which is a whole different thing instead of saying, I love you too. I told them that soon we were going to Georgia, says Jeanette. They talk about Georgia and they say, Grandma loves me. Or when they write their letters, they say the same thing. Children aren't old enough to know what it means when they say, I love you. They are old enough to know what it means when they say to a trusted adult, you love me. And that's what they need to feel. They don't need practice saying, I love you. They just don't. Bruce and Sylvie were looking at, we're going to do 2 Sylvie stories for some reason. They were looking at squirrels outside the window. And Bruce said, Sylvie, you know what I love? She shakes her head. He reaches out and he touches her with his pointer finger. Bruce is 3. Now, can a 3-year-old really say, I love you unconditionally to a 4-year-old and mean it? Oh, maybe not. But with each other, it's good practice. Whereas with an adult, they need practice saying, you love me, instead of, I love you. New subject. In almost every couple, and I've talked about this at lots of retreats, and I talked to lots of couples about it during interventions. In almost every couple, one person is the key of the couple. Sometimes it has to do with ability. Sometimes it has to do with whoever is most abusive. There are a lot of different reasons. It doesn't matter what the reason is. It just means that one person has to change first. Why? It's really kind of obvious as you're looking at them. You look at the 2 of them and you realize that if that person changes first, the other person's not going to. Whereas if that person changes first, it's going to make all the difference in the world to the second person. Many people resent being the key. They hear that it's their fault. They hear that it's unfair. No, it's just the key. When I go out to start my car, what's the single most important part of the car? The tires, the engine, the lights, the roof, the hood? No, the key, because it's just the next thing that has to be done. It's the first thing. One woman wrote to me and said, at our intervention, you told me that I am the key or the engine behind my marriage. Honestly, I still laugh out loud when I'm all alone because of how very cool it is to be the engine. I'm grateful that I have this opportunity. I'm grateful that I matter this much. And then she adds for one more emphasis, I'm grateful, and then some. We all have different abilities. We all have different gifts. We all have different liabilities. Be what you are. And if you're the key, then you're first. And it's not unfair at all. It's just your lot in life because of who you are. Here's a lady who posted, I think on one of the Facebook pages. She said, I reconnected with an ex-boyfriend from 20 years ago. He just introduced me to real love recently, just in the last couple of weeks. He lives in another state, and I'm having mixed feelings about him and guilt about if we do reconnect, and he wants me to move, leaving my children behind. Now, remember, this is an ex-boyfriend from 20 years ago, so she doesn't have, little baby children. And I'm having feelings of guilt about if we do reconnect and he wants me to move, leaving my children behind, because I'm so used to taking care of my kids for so many years by myself that I'm afraid to leave them behind for my own happiness. Everybody's wondering, well, how old are her children? My children are 31, 32, and 35. Why do I still have the need to take care of them? I'm also not getting any younger. So you can tell she's kind of torn about this. Opportunity possibly to find a partner, but she's got these kids who depended on her for so long. Make sure that first that you and your boyfriend read Real Love and Dating together, like now, and out loud together. Then Real Love and Marriage. Just because he's an ex doesn't mean you're really capable of living in an unconditionally loving way or that you're compatible. Choosing a partner is far more important than anything you'll ever do. Anything. I would suggest that you two read the dating book together and get a real love coach to help you to explore real love long before you even consider moving to be with him. But if it does work out, oh, honey, find your own happiness, really. I mean, these kids are old enough. 31 through 35. Dump them. They're not 12. Leave them behind. It's not selfish. Now you ask, why do I have a hard time leaving them? You feel a pull toward your kids because after all of these years of taking care of them as a single mother, taking care of them has given you a sense of purpose and importance. You don't need that anymore. And if they complain, ignore it. Tell them you're going off to find happiness with a partner and good luck with their own partners. This next writer says, the 5 steps when feeling angry have been helpful for me, and I really get the selfishness of anger. Good for you. Most people don't. They love to defend their anger. They're very attached to it, and you referred to it as the 5 steps, and it may not sound like a big thing, probably isn't, but they're really not 5 steps. Steps are often, sort of associated with techniques. They're really the 5 truths to remember. Truths are a foundation. Steps can be a technique-y thing. 5 truths to remember when you're angry, or to remember all the time. And to read those 5 truths, you can go to the blog January 16, 2014. You say, when recently interacting with somebody I've always been afraid of, it dawned on me that my fear was actually really selfish, just like my anger. As soon as I was afraid, I was thinking of me, and there's no way that I could be loving or hear my friend at all. That's just brilliant, honey. Most people don't figure that out. The fact that anger is selfish is pretty obvious, but so is fear. Fear is always about us, my pain, my potential pain, what I won't get, what you might do to me. Anger is about us also, but so's fear. You continue, I've spent so much of my life in fear, and it has seemed so fundamental, a reaction and not a choice that I'm making. To be fair, without love and instruction, fear is a reaction. It is an utterly involuntary reflex. Just like if you touch a hot stove, it's a reflex that your arm jerks away before your brain is even aware that it's hot. Now, reflexes like that are a good thing. like a knee jerk, because it saves you a whole lot of burning. Otherwise, you'd have your arm up against the hot stove. Your brain would say, "Gosh, that's really hot." Your nose would go, "Smells like something is burning," and by the time you pulled your arm away, you'd be severely burned. So, reflexes under circumstances like that for survival are great. But that might be the central problem of the world when our emotional responses and most of our other choices are reflexes. We really believe that other people and things make us afraid. But that can't be true. Why? Well, for at least two reasons, although there are more. First, in an obviously hurtful situation, like concentration camps, hurricanes, whatever, there are always the fearful people, 99% or so, sometimes more. And then there are the people who, in the same potentially hurtful circumstances, are calm. They're not afraid. So it has to be a choice, or we couldn't have that 1% or less who are not afraid. So how could it be a choice? We'll get to that. And second, when people are loved enough and taught, they lose their fear. Most of it all the time, and all of it some of the time. I've had, particularly lately, for reasons I don't really quite know or care to analyze, I've had some people who have chosen to be trusting and to listen to what I tell them and to feel the love that I offer. And it's been miraculous to watch their fear just vanish. And these are people who were especially afraid. So it's not related to the fact that their fear was less. If I've learned one thing in the last 20 years, it's that healing has nothing to do with how much trauma preceded it. You continue. Thinking of fear as an unloving choice has kind of shifted the perspective of it for me. Like, maybe I can choose fear or not. Like, maybe in choosing to be loving, I can choose not to be in selfish fear. It feels like a radical shift in my thinking. Oh dear, it really is. Do we really want to be selfish all our lives? Fear looks so helpless and reasonable. A bear rises up and growls at you. Well, of course, my fear is a reaction and there's nothing I can do. And we use that same justification for everything else in our lives. He made me afraid. But it really is selfish. While we're afraid, we're not thinking about the welfare of other people. And that's the definition of selfishness. You continue. Before, I had thought I needed to feel loved in order to be fearless. But the fear would just then evaporate. And yes, a lot of it has, fear and shame around mistakes especially. But I'm feeling loved a lot now. And it seems that sometimes my fear might be self-indulgent and that I'm choosing to be a selfish victim. And I can make a conscious choice to choose to be loving over fearful. So to help you understand this better, and even if your statement or question wasn't clear to everybody else, the way to happiness is almost always a two-fold approach. First, intellectual. We have to change our perspective. If we're not happy, we're always seeing something wrong. For example, here are some of the things that we see wrong. Here are some of the lies we believe when we're not happy. Anger is natural, and therefore it's okay. That's a lie. And when we believe that lie, we will be unhappy most of the time. Another lie. Fear is normal and therefore acceptable. Other people can hurt me. I'm afraid because of the selfishness of other people. These are all common lies, and until we change these beliefs, that's an intellectual change in our beliefs, we'll never be happy. But the second approach to genuine change and finding happiness is not intellectual. It's changing our feelings. Intellectual realization alone rarely is enough to make us happy. We simply can't let go of old beliefs until we feel loved. We tend to make decisions based on our feelings. This has been proven more and more just in the last decade, not based on the intellectual gathering of information. We want to believe that we're rational, but no, not usually so. We're very feeling motivated beings. The combination of intellect and feeling loved is what makes happiness possible. And intellect and feelings are feedback. We've talked about this, in some of the books, in what's called EJFR, or event, judgment, feeling, reaction. Changing our thoughts. So, for example, if I believe other people make me angry and I realize that that's a lie, changing that thought changes my feelings. I don't automatically become angry. I think about the choice that I have to make. If I see something is not a threat, I feel less afraid. So thinking changes feelings. But changing feelings changes thoughts too. If I feel loved, I have $20 million. And suddenly the potential threat of losing $2 looks, which is a thought, much less problematic. And it's a feedback loop. The more I change my thoughts, the more I change my feelings, which then changes more my thoughts, and round it goes, except that in this case, it's an upward spiral instead of the often referred to negative spiral. An example of something I've been learning. I think I've done this the last couple of times, but we're going to do another one today. Donna was leaving the room to do something for me, and I told her how I wanted it done. I don't remember what it was, whether she was getting something at the store, I just don't recall. And she had a quizzical look on her face, which means she didn't understand it, so I explained it again. And I asked her if she understood then, and she said yes, and I thought, I don't think so. So I described it a third time, or a third way. When she came back, she had not done it the way that I'd asked her to do it. And she said, I didn't understand, which is very understandable. When we describe something, we have it very clearly in our minds what we want. Listen to people describe how to get to their house, for example. It's laughable. They know how to get there, so they just go, left, right, and then the worst words of all, when somebody's giving directions, you can't miss it, which means you are going to miss it. We tend to assume that other people see it in their minds just like we see it in our minds. And so she said, I didn't understand, and I said, that's why I described it 3 times, in pretty much that tone of voice. Minutes later, I came back and I said, do you remember how I said that I described that 3 times? She nodded. I said, I didn't really like how I did that. She said, me neither. I said, when I said it, you probably heard, and she interrupted. She said, I heard you say, I told you 3 times, you stupid cow. And I said, well, you got to at least give me the comma, meaning the comma between I told you 3 times, comma, you stupid cow. We just burst into laughter, just about made her fall over backward in her desk chair. We don't have to avoid mistakes. I made a mistake to say, I told you 3 times. Well, yeah, clearly I did, but obviously not clearly enough or she would have gotten it. We don't have to avoid making those mistakes. We just need to see them and admit them. And it was over. Didn't really even turn into a conflict, but it was just a pebble in her shoe, or mine, or both. And we don't like pebbles in our shoes. We need to see them and admit them as soon as possible and get the pebble out. A man wrote to me and said, I still screw up with the kids pretty regularly, but I wanted to share a wonderful thing that happened yesterday. Billy and Sally, 2 of the kids, I think, were arguing. Sally grabbed Billy's arm and tried to pull him away. He slipped and bashed his cheek hard on the side of our bed. He screamed. He was genuinely hurt. He wasn't just faking. I picked him up, looked him over, gave him a hug, made sure there was no bleeding, grabbed some ice and told him that he was okay. Nice, beautifully done, took care of the kid, made sure that no arteries were severed. You didn't contribute to the drama, to the fear, which is critical. Instead of what many parents do is start screaming and yelling and acting excited and the whole deal. You keep going. Meanwhile, Sally was uncomfortably continuing to tease him, even though she's the one who had hurt him. As soon as I was calm, I turned to Sally and I held her and I asked her how she was feeling. Now, notice the rest of you, how brilliant this is. He made sure that the boy wasn't hurt, but he says to the girl, how are you feeling? Because when a kid is teasing another child after she's hurt him, something wrong is going on in her head. So he asked her how she was feeling, and she said, I feel bad. That's just brilliant. And such a response is possible only from the parent and the child with practice. Lots of practice, oodles of family meetings. And it turns out this family has had oodles of family meetings. The dad continues, I quietly helped her see that she was feeling guilty, that she'd just made a mistake and that she wasn't a bad person, so there was no reason to feel guilty. I told her that when people feel guilty, they don't want to feel bad. So they try and blame something or somebody else for what happened. And that's why she was teasing her brother to deflect the guilt and the blame. I told her it was fine that she'd messed up and asked how she felt. And she said, well, better, and gave me a hug and ran off. And a few minutes later, she came back smiling with a jar of flowers from the garden, a sandwich, a cup of juice, and a note of apology for her brother. How sweet. Without the father doing anything to make that happen except loving the offender, not just the offended one. In 10 minutes, it was all over. This is freakishly cool. If this had happened a few months back, the father says, I would have gotten angry at her, compounded her guilt, punished her, and then she would have been more likely to keep picking on her brother. I'm so grateful to be able to share moments like this with them and watch them learn to love each other. When I can remember I'm loved, it's simple and fun. What a lovely story. Love and teach, which is only possible if we parents feel loved. No parenting technique works for long. A woman came for an intervention and not long afterward wrote to me. She said, what a day. I feel so exhausted from all the doubting and the fear and the lies. When I went to bed, I couldn't shut off my thoughts. Doubting is a lot of work. Trusting is actually easier. She wrote, a few times I was able to get very close to the feeling that I had while I was in Rome, but then it went away so fast and I felt the tension coming back. When you trust all the way and refuse to entertain doubts, notice, refuse, it's a choice. Even for a second, the love doesn't go away so quickly and you don't feel tense. We actually get to say no. Just say no to drugs. Just say no to sexual assault. Just say no to ugly thoughts. If you can make choices about everything else, you can make choices about the thoughts in your head. We really can. Now, you may not have a choice about the thoughts that come into your head, but you get to choose what to do with them. She continues, this happened a few times. Like I couldn't sustain the peaceful feeling, and I let the fear win over and over. It's a choice. Choose. Say, I trust my daddy completely. I trust my coach completely. I trust somebody completely all the way. I refuse to live the old way. I refuse because it didn't work. And I'm always happier when I trust. We allow the doubts to stay in our minds. And we really can say, stop. I recommend that everybody reread the blog from September 24 of last year. She continues, I started reading my intervention notes, and you had said that I could email or text you whenever I had doubts. Once you said, just typing the email can sometimes help me. So here I am, writing an email. But part of me feels sad. You have the love right now. That's what's happening right now. Stay with this. Stay with the love you have, not the love you lost, not the love you forgot, not the love you might lose. Stay with what you have. You continue. But it's true. Just typing this helps me. I feel like I'm getting in touch with my real heart again, the one that's not covered in mud, the one you can see, the one very few people can see, but it's there. And that's me, the real me. It's still alive. It's the part of me that you help me to uncover at the intervention. It's who I am, and it's beautiful. And yes, you are beautiful. So live who you really are, as opposed to living fears, which are lies. Refuse to entertain your fears, to allow them to stay, which are the mud that covers up the queen that you are. We really all can make a choice in that regard, which is what we've been talking about over and over again in this particular video chat. Here's somebody who writes, after listening to a video chat from February 2014, in which you answered several of my questions, I felt compelled to write. I had a deep groan to myself when listening at where my focus was, and felt like slapping myself on the head, also something that I'm noticing I do from time to time. I also listened with new ears and realized that everything you said was true and has come true. I'm guessing at the time I wasn't really paying much attention to the message you were sending and was in too much pain myself to be able to hear much, and part of the message was a prediction of the future. But it didn't seem relevant to me at the time. So here's somebody writing and saying, you told me what was going to happen back in February 2014, and I wasn't ready to hear it, and now I am. Sometimes we can't hear a thing until much later than it was said. That's been true in my life an embarrassing number of times. You continue, I spent a year from that day continuing my journey with real love, filling up, making changes, learning to love my husband, but the burden became too much. The more real love I was needing to do, the more control I took away from him, and the angrier he became and fought against it. Now, I happen to know him, so I can say this. He has always fought being responsible and loving. He's never wanted to be responsible. He's never been willing to sacrifice anything to be loving. So you continue. Even though I was doing the best I could, and yeah, I was making a lot of mistakes, he just would not accept anything I offered him, and it became unbearable. The fear of leaving him became less than the pain of staying in the relationship. Good way to put it. And I found myself having to go to group twice a week, which he hated, as well as lots of Skype calls, which he hated also, but it just wasn't enough. It got what he it did get what he said he wanted originally, which was to help me stop drinking, and apparently the only problem he said that he had in the marriage, but that quickly became obviously not true, because he continued to have lots of problems with me. And it became clear that if I was going to find any level of happiness, I would have to leave. And in some cases, some relationships can't survive. I've worked with lots of people where the marriage has become gloriously successful, as even one person has chosen to live according to the principles of unconditional love. But in some marriages, in some relationships, one person just becomes increasingly antagonistic and difficult as the other person changes, because people get together in the beginning in the world of imitation love because they each get something from the other. There's a trading that's going on that they both agree to. And when one person decides to live in an unconditionally loving way, that person takes away the trade. And very often the other person hates it. It's very common, for example, when one person who's an alcoholic quits using alcohol, the other person divorces them. They liked being with somebody that they could take care of emotionally and that they could blame for everything. We change all the dynamics when we change, and some relationships can't survive. You continue. As soon as I told him I was going, he said that he would talk to a coach again, which he did, but it became clear that he was still using real love to beat me up with a stick, and he was never going to really engage, so I left. Not an easy decision for me after 20 years of marriage and several children, and I realized it was the fear of what other people would think of me. It was my sense of obligation to keep the family together, blah, 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 making it all about me again. And these are all natural fears. Now I've been gone from the marital home for a while, and I'm renting for the time being, and he's staying in the house that we used to have. And within 2 weeks of my leaving, he'd already found another girlfriend, which hurt like crazy for a while. But in the end, I just took it as information, and I made the right decision, that I'd made the right decision to leave. He proves with his every action that he's committed to a life that cannot work. So he proved that he didn't want to love you. He immediately entered into another relationship, which he is going to screw up. And you get to live the rest of your life being happy, being loving. You keep going. I have since found out from my kids that he's already weeks later finished with his girlfriend, which was exactly the order of things you predicted would happen last year. I wondered what you were talking about when you said I made predictions from last year. So I'm continuing my real love journey, and I've had some wonderful experiences, which has reinforced my faith and trust. I still make mistakes, but I now know that it's okay to do that. I'm learning to let go of the reins and trust that you and other coaches that I have love me and know me better than I know myself. That sounds like a really arrogant thing for a coach to say to somebody early on, but it's really actually kind of obvious. When people are in pain, they're insane. When they're afraid, they're blind. And that's one of the biggest purposes of a coach or a wise person, is to provide a view that's not contaminated by pain and fear. So very often they know the people they see better in 5 minutes than the people do themselves. You said, I'm discovering who I am and how to be. I'm learning to love my kids now, which I couldn't do before. I know that if I slip and scrape my knees, that there will be people there to help me and hold out a helping hand. I'm loving my life. This is hard stuff to do sometimes. Living real love doesn't mean things will be easy. You might still lose a marriage, as you have. Children might still be rebellious. Children might use drugs, whatever. You just keep being loving. You get more love, and you trust that process. And it's an absolute guarantee that if we keep these principles in our lives, we will be happier. Let me see. I'm going to do a shorter one. Here's somebody who says, last night I went over to my mother's house, and my fiance Mark asked me when I'd be back. I said about 9:30, but then I got involved at my mother's house and I was having a good time, so I texted Mark at 9:30 and I told him that I'd be later, 9:30 being the time you said you'd be home. That I'd be later by about an hour or so, and he didn't respond. When I got home, he was asleep. Said he had been since about 9. He was angry that I'd been so late at my mother's. He said I didn't tell him. He said it was too late for a woman to be out on the road. So what am I supposed to say to that? First thing is, you don't respond to him angrily. You love him. You tell him you did text him, not defensively. You say, I did, because I care about you. He was asleep, which is not your problem. Now, it would have been considerate if you'd texted him sooner, because he thought you'd be home at 9:30, and that's when you texted. So you were already late before you texted. Not, particularly good form on your part, but a small thing. And he doesn't get to tell you when it's too late to be out on the road, even though you're a poor, helpless, and stupid woman. That was a joke, by the way. You don't need to send me letters about stupid women. Uh, and be nice when you do it. Tell him that it's sweet that he'd be concerned about your welfare, but that you still get to decide what time you're going to come home and how late you're going to drive, but that you will keep him informed. He's your fiance. He's your future partner. We always let our partners know where we'll be. If he's asleep when you text him, there's not much you can do about that. Always err on the side of kindness rather than directness where possible. So again, he's your fiance, you're not married. So observe his behavior and your own. Observe these moments of anger and controlling on his part. Talk about them. Admit your mistake that you should have texted earlier. Talk about how he could have done things differently. Read Real Love and Marriage together and make wise observations, because if he's controlling and telling you what to do now while you're engaged, I promise you that when you get married and you exchange vows that most people take in essence as a declaration of ownership of their partners, he's going to tend to be a whole lot more controlling then. So now's the time to be observing his response to your attempts to be loving with him. Make a smart decision now rather than having to make a much more difficult decision years from now. Find all the love you can, all of us. To you who are working with your fiance, to all of us, find it, trust it, remember it, share it, and we will be happier and we will make better decisions in everything we do. We'll see you in a week.